Hi, and welcome back to my channel. Today's review is going to be about the new TV series Heated Rivalry. It's a series that is an adaptation from a book series by Rachel Reed, and it's 6 books. And Heated Rivalry is actually the second book in her series, and it was adapted for Crave, which is a Canadian streaming service, and then HBO Max has I guess, acquired the rights to stream it for us here in America. But let me just give a brief synopsis of it before I get into my review. So it's about two hockey players, Ilya Rozanov and Shane Hollander, who are basically pitted as rivals since they entered the league, the NHL, as rookies. And over the course of several years, they start to hook up in secret, and their relationship evolves from like being together in secret and just hooking up to being an actual relationship, and they fall in love. And of course, the backdrop to this is the pressures and dangers of if they come out as, queer or like gay in Shane's case and bisexual in Ilya's case. But I have read Heated Rivalry. The print copy is like sold out dang near everywhere, so I got the ebook version of Heated Rivalry and the sequel, The Long Game. And I read Heated Rivalry after watching the first 5 episodes, and then I finished The Long Game right after the 6th episode premiered. And I really liked the books. I know some people don't, which I think is kind of weird since that's the source material, but I really enjoyed both of them. And just like on a personal, I think I really enjoyed this series because this is the first time I've ever watched any queer media while acknowledging that I'm queer myself. I identify as asexual and probably aromantic as well. And it's something that I've really only felt comfortable with like within the past year or so. So I think looking at this through that lens of feeling comfortable with myself, I think definitely kind of changed the way that I viewed it. But I really, really enjoy watching this series. And at first I wasn't going to watch it, but like you get, what's the word? Influenced. You get influenced when you see everybody talking about it. So yeah. And I just think it's just a really great adaptation from a book because, a lot of times when things get adapted, you have to cut out things or rearrange things. And I was surprised after reading the book how much they actually kept from the book down to like the actual dialogue itself. And what makes it so great is that the actors that they cast, which they are so sweet and also so young. When I found out how old they were, I was like, okay. Anyway, but Hudson Williams, who plays Shane Hollander, and Connor Story, who plays Ilya Rozanov, they are such brilliant actors because, like I said, it's this adaptation is so close to the book, and they just kind of like just literally just they just elevated and like took it to the next level, and like you read these lines in the book, and then when they deliver them, it's just their performances are great. So, what I'm going to do to try and keep this short is I will point out just a few things that I like about from each episode. Um, I'm not going to get to everything because I would be here all day, and I feel like so many other people are covering this. If I miss something, I know there's a review somewhere that won't. So, I'm just going to try and point out a couple of things that stuck out to me in each episode and then wrap it up. So, in episode 1 is when Shane and Ilya meet, and they meet as teenagers at a World Hockey Championship. And one of the things that I think is interesting is that I actually don't like this discourse of the whole idea of like who fell first, who fell harder, because I definitely think the way the actors played it, you could tell that both of the characters were infatuated, smitten, whatever, into each other, even if they weren't consciously aware that that's what they were feeling when they meet each other. And one of the things I adore Shane as a character and identify so much with him. And it's interesting because the author of the book and the actor Hudson have confirmed that Shane is supposed to be autistic, and it informs a lot of his behaviors that you see throughout the show. And one of the things that I find so fascinating is even though he's not, because it's interesting because after they meet they cut to this scene where an announcer is saying Shane isn't sociable, but then he went out of his way to introduce himself to Ilya, do small talk, shake his hand, tell Ilya how much of a great player he thinks he is. So I just find it fascinating that, you know, sometimes doing those types of like, oh, small talk, all that type of stuff is hard for people, especially for me as an introvert. But like he went out of his way to do that. And I love that. And I also think it's interesting because Ilya was out there by himself, and you kind of have to imagine nobody else from an opposite team tried to introduce themselves. And here comes Shane. Like, hey, it's very cute. And, in keeping with the whole, the character of Shane having autism, I am an introvert, a very introverted person, a very quiet person, but having a discussion with my sister last Christmas, who actually, for her job, she works with children who are like on the spectrum and diagnosing. And she was telling me how she, sees some of those traits in me, especially when we were talking about like when we were kids. And so knowing that now and watching this character, I'm like, yep, I feel so much. I identify with that. Now, I am not like diagnosed. This is something that I'm going to be looking into in the new year. But I also have anxiety. And so the anxiety of calling to try and set up the testing to see if I'm autistic, it's a thing. So anyway, but like I really identify with his character. And one of the scenes that I absolutely love is when they flash forward, because again, this takes place over the course of a couple of years, to them getting drafted together into the league. And the top three picks are standing there. So Ilya is the top pick, number one, and Shane is number two. And they're telling Shane to smile. And the way he does this smile, first ones you can kind of tell he's a little overstimulated. Because I think at first you would think, oh, he's not smiling because he's mad he got drafted second. And that might be part of it, but I just view it more as like he's been overstimulated, standing there, taking pictures, doing all this stuff, and you're all still going. And so when he does that smile where it's like it's just this slow, oh yeah, you want me to smile? Oh my gosh. Because as a kid, I would just be sitting somewhere quiet, not smiling, and people would be like, is everything okay? It's like it's the way that people want you to perform how they think you should be reacting in a certain moment that just really resonated with me. And then I like in that scene too, after they're drafted and they're both basically with like their new coaches or managers, I guess, of their teams and their parents, how Shane looks up and Ilya is already looking at him from like the balcony and they look at each other. And also just immediately it sets up the difference in their family dynamics where Shane's parents are down there like they're proud of him and everything versus Ilya's dad who's already criticizing him in front of his new boss. And I do think they do a great job in each episode pulling back the layers of how stressful Ilya's home life is. And you see that when you see the first like phone call that he has with his brother in that episode. Um, okay, and just like I made notes and I just realized I jumped ahead like really far in these notes. But one of the other things that I like is that Shane has a hard time kind of picking up on like the flirtatious nature of his conversations with Ilya because I love when they do the commercial and Ilya tells him that he's pretty twice. And all Shane can think about is like he thinks he's like making fun of him a little bit because they have on makeup because it's a commercial. And he's all like, no, I have on makeup too. Yeah, but I don't look pretty like you. I just think it's interesting because obviously English is Ilya's like second language. Which, did I mention that he was Russian? Whatever. He's Russian and Shane is Canadian. See, I knew this was going to happen. I knew I was going to forget stuff. Anyway, but English is his second language. And I feel like he wouldn't have said such a specific term to describe Shane's attractiveness if he didn't mean it, considering English is his second language. So when he called him pretty, he deliberately meant that. And it's just so cute because Shane's like, hmm? Like, he just doesn't get it. Um, but anyway, also in the first episode, we see them hook up for the first time. And it's interesting because even though this is supposed to be something very casual, Ilya still treats it like, because this is Shane's first time doing anything with a man, he still treats, Shane with, like, care, and just like kind of like easing him into it and not being like, snarky about it, which I really liked about their first encounter. And then later in that episode is when you see that they're about to, hook up again after like that all-star game. And the thing I like about that scene is that scene definitely demonstrates like what we mean when we talk about consent, because it's interesting how usually when we talk about consent, it's in a conversation about men and women. But in this scene, even though Shane and Ilya have done sexual acts leading up to them being on the bed, and then they're about to have sex, the minute Shane's like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that here, Ilya is like, okay, cool, we'll do it another time. Like, he does not pressure Shane to go any further, even though they've already done some stuff, even though they're already naked. And he's just like, oh, okay, fine. And that's like the definition of like consent. Like, it doesn't matter what you've done with that person leading up to that point. If you don't want to go any further, you don't have to. And that person should respect that. And they demonstrate that in that scene very well. And then the ending part when they're at like the Rookie of the Year awards and Shane wins and he goes to find Ilya and he thinks Ilya is sulking because Shane won. And it just shows what will become a common theme with him is their miscommunication. And you start to really understand how much of a trigger Russia is for Ilya, because he's like, not everything is about you. I'm going home. And Shane really not picking up on the fact that his demeanor and behavior is because he really doesn't want to go back to Russia. So that whole interaction where it's like Shane is trying to figure out what's going on and he just doesn't have all the information. I just think that's such an interesting conversation. Okay, moving on to episode 2. I feel like Russia in this entire series is like its own character, because it's so much of who Ilya is, not just because that's his nationality, but because all of the things that Russia brings up for him about his family, his sexuality, everything. And so the kind of common theme, at least for the first few episodes, is every time going home and being in Russia is brought up, he shuts down. And it takes Shane a long time and both of them really to finally discuss why it's such a problem for Ilya, and him finally not like shutting Shane down every time he asks about it. But so in the um in the beginning of the episode, you finally have Ilya and Shane actually like fully consummating their relationship and having sex. And it's interesting because it sets up this dynamic where we're supposed to perceive this as like very casual for both of them. But then when they're saying goodbye in a scene that is like everybody's favorite and they kiss, it's very obvious that even though they think that it's casual, there is an intimacy there that goes beyond that, that they've already developed with each other. And again, Russia gets brought up, and Ilya's like, yep, don't want to talk about it because Shane is talking about, hey, we're going to be in the Olympics together. Oh, you must be happy they're going to be in Russia. He is not happy they're going to be in Russia. And that just really, again, just goes over Shane's head. And then the Olympics themselves, I really like how they showed how, like, whitely, I knew I was going to mess that up. I have an issue with saying my W's and R's. How tightly wound up Ilya is every time he's home, and how he just completely shuts down. And so, you know, he already has the stress of having lost, not even making it to the medal round when they're over there in Russia. He runs into Shane. He's really distant and cold towards Shane, and all Shane is trying to do is check in on him. But he's so like he's back in like his old environment of like disassociating and shutting down that he can't even spare a moment to like fully explain what's going on to Shane. And he just has such a sadness about him that whole episode. And he is like really afraid of like showing like any type of like impropriety, because it's like he's home now. And like the scene where he's like with his father and he goes to like this party, and you can just see him just like I said, disassociate, just staring like straight into the distance, trying to contain like all of his emotions, and how hard that is for him. And it kind of, like I said, it informs his whole entire demeanor towards Shane once you see his behavior around his father and everybody else there in Russia. And then, of course, we get to the part where they're in Las Vegas, and I think who was what? I guess there's the one where he wins MVP. I can't remember now which award it is, but the point is that they're both there to present at this award show. And at this point, he's ghosted Shane and has not responded to any texts for like 6 months. And again, it's just interesting how that one thing, like going to Russia for the Olympics, basically causes him to like withdraw for such a long time from Shane. And you can tell that he's trying to get some type of control back in the way he treats this entire sexual encounter. And what's interesting about it is a bunch of people were talking about how if you read like the bonus chapter that the author did showing you Ilya's perspective on Las Vegas, that it would change your opinion about how he behaves. It doesn't. Like, I mean, I feel like we get it. We get that he's, trying to control the situation, doesn't want to, basically catch feelings, all of that. But it's just like he was distant and he was cold and and not slightly, he was dismissive. And so it's like, I don't think knowing what he was thinking really changes that, because Shane doesn't know what he's thinking. All he's getting is the same wall blocking off Ilya's emotions. And again, that trigger, after they have their encounter and they're sitting in bed, what does Shane do? He brings up Russia, and it goes downhill every single time, because and again, you cannot blame Shane for that, because Shane is trying to have a conversation, and at this point it's like they're not even like friends with benefits. They don't even really maybe consider each other friends. So he's starting this conversation because he's trying to get to know Ilya, and Ilya is not telling him anything. And so it's like, it's just a massive miscommunication on both of their parts. And that's what makes it kind of sad when that episode ends, because there was probably more that they both wanted to say to each other, and then they just didn't. All right, so moving on to episode 3. Now, this is where the show kind of takes a turn, because again, this is based off of a book series. And the first book in the book series is Game Changer. And it's about Scott, who's slightly older. It's funny, he's slightly older than Shane and Ilya in the books, but then they made him like 15 years older in the show. And the way everybody keeps talking about him, like, oh, he looks so good for 40. I'm about to be 40 in a couple of months. Like, the way people treat 40 like you about to be put out to pasture. Anyway, so the story is about Scott Hunter and how he meets this man named Kip, who works in this smoothie shop and is trying to get into grad school, and they develop a relationship. And I think it's important that they did dedicate an episode to them, because later on, them as a couple will have such a profound impact on Ilya and Shane, and it just wouldn't have hit the way or landed the way it was supposed to in the show if you didn't get their backstory. So, it's interesting because it definitely shifts the idea from two players who are like, closeted, seeing each other, to the idea of a hockey player being gay but not being out, but then being in a relationship with someone who's not famous and is fully out to everyone in his world, and how that kind of clashes with each other. And you see how Kip is surrounded by so many supportive people, his father, his friends, and Scott doesn't really have that. And that's kind of like part of the crux of how their relationship evolves, where Kip doesn't want to be kept a secret and Scott just isn't ready to be out yet. And one of the scenes that is just like so sad to me, which you see like the full scene in episode 2 and they do a callback in episode 3, is when they're in Sochi at the Olympics, and Carter Vaughn, who is Scott's teammate, is talking about how any gay athlete that is competing there is brave because of the laws against gay people in Russia. And it's so interesting because, you can tell that he's sympathetic, but he has no idea he's sitting next to two men who are gay, and both of them just sitting there listening to this man. And it's like, even though he's giving an indication that he might be safe for both of them to come out to, they just don't know, and they can't take that risk. And it's just sad to watch them listen to him say that, knowing that that's their reality competing in Russia that they themselves are gay men, but they can't even tell the person sitting right there at the table with them. And like I said, they do that scene again in episode 3. And like I said, it's one of the sadder moments to me. Um, but at any rate, the episode ends where they essentially break up because Scott isn't ready to be out yet, even though he really loves Kip. And it's really important because, like I said, it's definitely sets the groundwork for what we'll see Shane and Ilya decide to do about their relationship. So I liked the episode. I know some people thought it kind of didn't fit, but it fit perfectly to me. Okay, I'm trying to think if I'm going to end up doing this in 2 parts. We'll see. Let's keep going. Okay. So, episode 4. So, one of the things that I find really entertaining and fascinating about Shane's character is his mom is always negotiating brand deals for him and endorsements. And so they do this really interesting montage because like his commercials like pop up throughout the series. It's so funny. But they do this montage of him doing all of these commercials and endorsements and just commercial after commercial. And they show his mom being there on set. And it's just like, it reminded me of there's this movie that came out in 2014 called Beyond the Lights with Gugu Mbatha Raw, I think that's her name, and Minnie Driver's her mother. But she's like a pop singer, and her mom is her manager. And just that theme of when your parent is your manager and they treat you like a brand rather than a child, like their kid, and they agree to things that make you feel uncomfortable, but you don't want to challenge it because you feel like, well, if my parents okay with it, I should be okay with it too. And it's just like, it's so interesting because he his face in every single commercial looks like he would rather be anywhere else, but he's going to do it because this is part of his brand, his career, and his mom has set it up. And it's just like, it's just, that's why sometimes when people have their parents as their managers and those lines get blurred, it's a problem. Um, and especially because Shane's mom has a problem understanding his limits or his boundaries on that, because the part where they are meeting and she's telling him Rolex wants him to go to Wimbledon, and he clocks immediately the racial undertones of it, that they want him to be there kind of like as a token. And she just doesn't get it. She doesn't even go any further, which is interesting because she's the parent that's the person of color. But it's just like, again, it kind of shows her disconnect with understanding how Shane himself feels about all of these endorsements. And of course, this comes after a moment that I'm going to get to with Ilya. So he's like, where his mind is at is like, that's the last thing he wants to hear about is doing another thing as Shane Hollander, the brand, and representing, himself at Wimbledon. It's like, no, he don't feel like it. And she just misses that completely. And then in this episode, so like I said, they definitely lay the groundwork for Ilya's home life being stressful. And the thing that they start dropping hints about is the fact that his father has Alzheimer's. And there is a phone call in episode 4 after he's had Shane over to his house, where honestly, that's probably the only scene where I actually teared up a little, because I'm not overly emotional. Like, I love this series, but I didn't cry. But that scene I almost teared up on, because he gets this phone call from his father. And even without it being in English and just the subtitles, I've had that conversation before with family members. My mom has had that conversation before, and my grandmother passed away from Alzheimer's. And just the feeling where you can tell on the other end that his father does not remember who Ilya's brother is, does not remember his ex-wife, is probably very disoriented and freaking out. And Ilya trying to calm him down while also reminding him who these people are and what's going on, and feeling helpless because he's so far away. He's in a whole other country. Like, we had to deal with that just being in another state. I can't imagine being in an entirely different country, listening to your parent freak out and not know who they are or where they are. And then your brother, who's supposed to be helping, is like, where are you? What are you doing? This is so emotional and so familiar. Like I said, I've been around to see those types of conversations, and it's just like, and this is, in my case, this was with a family member that I actually really loved, and this is my grandmother. But I can only imagine it's harder for Ilya, because it's like he has this strained relationship with his father, but he still has this obligation and concern to take care of him. So that whole scene just kind of like they did that perfectly, what it's like when you're trying to talk to someone that doesn't remember what's going on and or who people are. And then we get to a scene. Okay, actually, let me go back because this scene that I want to talk about actually happens before they get together on the couch. What I wanted to talk about too in this episode is they kind of start to talk about their sexualities in a very roundabout way, and Ilya, his whole delivery of that conversation was just, man, just that's no. And I don't know, I guess some of it could be attributed to like the language barrier of not knowing how to just flat out say something. But at any rate, he's basically trying to figure out if Shane is bisexual like him or not, and he's basically hinting at him being bisexual without actually saying it. And he's explaining like how casual his relationships are with women, like, you know what, nothing serious, but I am attracted to women, and I, when I'm not with you, that is who I usually have as a partner. And he talks about Svetlana, and he really goes out of his way to emphasize that she is not his girlfriend, just a friend, and that everything with them is extremely casual, and trying to figure out if that's the same with Shane. And of course, Shane, without context or further information, is like, okay. And obviously, he's still dealing with the fact that he is gay. So, he's covering up, trying to, in the way he covers up not wanting to discuss about his sexuality is by saying that, well, you don't see me with women because I'm a very private person. And then, of course, immediately after this, he goes out and gets an actual girlfriend that is very public. And I just think that's such an interesting contrast between Ilya basically pointing out, oh, yeah, nothing serious, to Shane having a very serious relationship, and how that deeply, deeply affects Ilya, because it's like, I think he realizes that he really miscommunicated what he wanted to say, and like he feels like now they're at a point of no return. And that's later in the episode. But then what? Okay, yeah, I had to switch around some of my points. So basically, they're having this conversation about women before he takes the phone call with his father. Then after the phone call with his father, the scene happens that I like to call "make me feel good," because it's like it reminded me, like I said, not an exact one-to-one comparison, but in Monsters Ball with Halle Berry and Billy Bob Thornton, where her character has had this traumatic experience of losing her child in a car accident, and Billy Bob Thornton's character takes her home and they have sex. And before they have sex, because she's having, had a traumatic experience, she's grieving the loss of her son. And he asks her, well, what do you want me to do? And she said, I want you to make me feel good. And so to me, that's kind of what that scene after that phone call represents, is that Ilya's obviously upset by this phone call. And then Shane makes him feel good. They both feel good. But then it all just goes downhill from there. Like when I watched this for the first time, I was like, no, go back, go back. Because they both say each other's first name for the first time. And it freaks Shane out. It becomes way too real for him. And then we proceed with him getting the famous actress girlfriend. And it just, whew, the rest of that episode just takes that turn right after that moment. But one of the things I did want to point out is, so after that moment, Shane meets Rose Landry, who's an actress, and they're talking, and they have this really interesting conversation where Rose points out that it must have been hard for him as a child in hockey because he most likely was the only Asian kid. And he says, well, no, there was one other kid, but they hated me because I had a Western last name. So it's like kids forgot to make fun of me. And I thought that was interesting as a Black person that's grown up in a predominantly white area, is that oftentimes when there are other children of color, or specifically of your race, like in my experience, when there were other Black kids, your first assumption would be to think we're the only ones, so we should be in community with each other. But oftentimes that doesn't happen, and you try and like assimilate into the larger group at the detriment to your relationship with someone who looks just like you. And I have experienced that myself with other black kids in environments where we're the only black kids, them not liking me or us not getting along. And I just thought that was interesting that that was pointed out because it kind of reminds me of if you've ever seen the spoof. It's like a parody, not another teen movie, where the black character consciously admits I am the token black guy, and then they go to like this party, and there's this other black guy there, and he's like, "Oh, excuse me, I'm supposed to be the token black guy," and so it's like it kind of reminded me of that in the sense that you know that should have been maybe a comforting thing for Shane to see another Asian kid, and it just didn't turn out that way. So I thought that was an interesting conversation for them to have. And it's like one of those things that's interesting about that is like him being biracial in the book isn't really talked about a lot, but they do a lot of like sprinklings of what that must be like for Shane throughout the whole series, which is very interesting. Every conversation about it is very interesting. And I'm going to talk about more of that a little later, but I just love that conversation between them. And then Shane's relationship with Rose. Um, One of the things that I liked how they showed is their relationship highlights how much the media tells you what to think about celebrity couples and you have no idea what is actually going on because they are presented as this very cute fun couple. Oh, it's a professional athlete and an actress, and obviously we as the audience know that this is not like some deep romantic relationship. They are not about to get engaged, but it's just the way social media and all of that works presents celebrity couples to you in such a way where you think everything is perfect and it absolutely isn't, and it just lets you know you don't have to take everything that's presented to you at face value because everybody is believing what they're reading or seeing without actually knowing the nature of this relationship, especially Ilya. He's just sitting there scrolling his phone, watching the news. Like he's just taking it all in as fact without trying to really think about what this relationship actually might be, considering his relationship with Shane. He's just believing every single thing he's told, and it's just like killing him inside. And just one little thing that I thought was interesting is, again, that difference between him having these casual private relationships with women versus the first time and the only time we see Shane with a woman is extremely public, and she's actually a girlfriend. It is not a casual acquaintance or encounter. And I just thought it was interesting the two scenes with the women in their lives wearing the jerseys. So like in the first episode we are introduced to Ilya's good friend Svetlana, and she's like waiting for him in his house to surprise him, and she has on his jersey. And it's interesting because this is supposed to be a private moment where she probably thought that would be real sexy and cute, and she's waiting for him and they hook up. But it's a private moment. Nobody else knows that they get together like that. Nobody sees her do that. This is like a private moment versus when Rose goes to one of Shane's games and is wearing his jersey, and it's like this big public declaration of, oh, okay, they're together. And just again, that idea of they kept trying to have a conversation in this episode about sexuality and their relationship to women, and how you really see the breakdown in Ilya not being able to articulate himself enough to explain how casual his relationships are, and then being kind of blindsided by how public Shane's first relationship with a woman is. It's just an interesting contrast to me. Okay, so in episode 5, Shane has like several coming out moments throughout the entire series, but his first like real coming out moment, kind of like to himself and another person, is when him and Rose break up. And it's a sweet, really nice scene. And it's interesting because once he's finally able to acknowledge, even without saying it out loud, that he is gay and he is attracted to women, and I'm not women. he, I took Benadryl before this. Anyway, that he is attracted to men, he is gay. Um, how much of like a relief that is for him to finally share that with someone and then to not be judged for it. And so I think, that first coming out and not being rejected definitely changes the trajectory of how he starts to deal with his sexuality and his relationship with Ilya. And in the process, he's embraced by Rose, and he gains like a confidant and a best friend. And I think that was so important, as you see later on when he continues to kind of like come out to other people, because after this, he's finally able to acknowledge and tell Ilya that he is gay and that he actually cares about Ilya, and it can't be casual for him anymore, and hasn't been casual probably like for some time. And by him opening up about that, then we finally get Ilya finally acknowledging and explaining to him why he doesn't want to go back to Russia, what it's like when he's in Russia, who his father and brother are, what's going on at home. And so it just kind of like opens this floodgate where they can finally be honest with each other, and Shane can ask him about Russia and he doesn't get shut down. So I love how one coming out leads to another coming out situation that leads to them finally having some good communication about what they are to each other. And then, of course, okay, I'm going to skip a little too. So Ilya's dad passes away. He's in Moscow. Just a cute scene. It's funny because Shane wears reading glasses, and Ilya thinks he's extremely attractive in them and wants him to keep the glasses on. And yeah, all men look better with glasses. So that scene was just cute to me. Um, and then what's interesting, I think, in this episode is both of them more or less express, excuse me, their love and affection for each other indirectly in their own ways in this episode. So obviously, um, with Ilya, he expresses it in that Russian monologue where he knows Shane isn't going to know what he's saying. So, excuse me. So he's as honest as he's ever been and basically saying, I love you. I'm so in love with you, and I don't know what to do about it. But he is free enough finally to at least say that in his own language and like put that out there that this is real for him, without like again directly saying it to Shane in English so that Shane would know, but he still says it anyway. And then the indirect way Shane does it is Shane is like a planner and a thinker and has like a very internal life. So like if you are welcomed into his internal circle of people, that means something. So his expression of that after he has his injury and he's in the hospital high on drugs, on pain medicine, is to invite Ilya to his cottage. So it's like, to me, that was his version of indirectly saying, I love you, because it's like, I am inviting you into my private space in where we can be together and have this time to ourselves. And what's interesting is both of them are like saying their love to each other without saying it, but it shows you the character growth of both of them and how much both of them want the other one to know, I really like you. I love you. I'm not saying that yet, but I want you to be around. I want to be with you as much as I can. So I like that. And then, the episode ends where Scott Hunter wins the Stanley Cup, and he has Kip come out onto the ice, and he kisses him and essentially comes out as gay. And I love that scene because, it's one of those things about like when you're in any, marginalized group, being the first and the bravery and the courage it takes to be the first, because he knew what that was going to mean to have Kip come out there and kiss him like that, and what he was saying in doing that, and how it's like it's not the quite the same as if he had just said like I'm gay in a statement. It was like a full-on expression of, I have a boyfriend that I'm proud of, that I love, and I want everybody to see it. And excuse me, my throat is so dry. Yeah, I'll be right back. Okay, I had to go get me some water. I didn't realize my throat was that dry. But anyway, um, so yeah, again, him pulling out Kip onto the ice, it obviously was the moment that changed everything for Ilya and Shane. So it was important that he was brave enough to do that in such a public. Okay, apparently my throat is still parched. Anyway, he was able to do that in such a public way and an inspiring way, and it really meant something. Okay, I now have a cough drop, so excuse me, but I don't know what's going on. Anyway, and so we move on to episode 6, which is the last episode. And so to piggyback off of the ending, you see Scott at the MHL awards, and he's like the MVP, and he gives his speech, basically, talking about what it meant to come out as gay and how the love of his partner Kip inspired him to be brave. And I just love that he continues to publicly acknowledge Kip. And one of the things I thought was interesting is I saw some people not like the fact that Kip wasn't there, but I think the thing I like about it is, remember, one of this one half of this couple is a celebrity, one half is not, and he's literally just put this partner of his boyfriend, like on the public stage. And so I feel like it might have been too overwhelming for him to actually be there at the awards, because everybody would be like, "Oh, hi, how are you?" Been all up in his business. This, in a way, gives him time to ease into that world. And so he gets to experience that moment surrounded by his people, his friends, his community, being acknowledged like that. And I think that's important because that's where his comfort is. And obviously, he'll adapt to being like in a more public relationship. But to me, that's what that signified. Like, he was still acknowledging how much he loved Kip, but let Kip ease into being a famous hockey player's boyfriend in public. But yeah, I thought that was sweet that they started off the episode with that. Okay, now on to the moments at the cottage, because part of the thing that was so important with Scott coming out is it encouraged Ilya to accept Shane's invitation to go to his cottage in the summer. So, a couple of things. The part where Shane is making the 8 burgers because that's what the recipe calls for, and how everybody has pointed out that that's like a part of his autism, I completely relate to that, because it's like sometimes your brain just isn't going to tell you, hey, you can do this as another option. When you're presented with something that you're following to the letter, this is the recipe. The recipe tells me to do this. Some of us, our brains aren't just going to tell us to cut it in half and do all of that stuff. It's just not. You're going to do exactly what it says because you don't want room for error. You don't want to mess up. And so for him, it's like, well, I'm just following directions. And it was such an interesting moment, especially because you can tell he's slightly embarrassed by it. But Ilya thinks it's kind of cute and funny. And even though he's kind of teasing him for it, he's not being mean about it. He understands, okay, this is Shane being Shane, making 8 burgers. And I like that. And then one of the things I think is interesting in the scene after and while they're eating is basically Ilya wants to know more about Shane's parents. And when he points out that like the only thing he really knows about Shane's mother is that she's Japanese, and then he's like, yeah, that's where you get your looks from. And Shane says, yeah, half of them. It makes me think about how Shane, and I think this was interesting when people, were kind of upset that the book didn't talk about his ethnicity more. And I think what's interesting about it is Shane is biracial. And when he says, yeah, half of them, I feel like that gives you insight into how he identifies. Shane does not see himself solely as Asian representation or an Asian person. I am biracial. Doesn't mean he's like ashamed of his mother or anything. It's just his identity is biracial. His parents are his parents. And a lot of times, like kind of like a reoccurring theme is he only talks about being Asian when someone else brings it up to him, because I think for him, he's just existing in the world as Shane Hollander. I'm biracial. Obviously, I'm mixed with Asian if you look at me, but it's not something that I'm actively thinking about all of the time. And that's why every time it's brought up, you can kind of see him glitch, because it's like when in the first episode, when the reporter compares him to Tiger Woods and Serena Williams, do you think you have any of the same challenges as them? The part where his mom is telling him that it's important that he do these endorsements because people are going to be looking up to him. The part where he's invited to Wimbledon and he clocks it's because, oh, y'all don't want a bunch of white people up in that tennis box. The fact that Rose is the one that had to point out how isolating it must have been to be the only Asian kid. Like, to me, all of those moments let you know that he is experiencing the world as a biracial person that accepts both sides of him. And he doesn't always think of himself as just one thing. And it's interesting because it's like, I think he kind of was caught off guard by Ilya pointing that out, but Ilya also was just pointing out that he thinks Shane is cute too. So I just thought that was an interesting kind of insight to me into how Shane views his racial identity. And then of course when he's talking about his dad, and it's cute because he's proud of his dad. It's like, yeah, my dad works for the Treasury Board of Canada, and he played hockey at McGill. And I thought that was interesting because one of my closest friends from high school actually went to McGill University, and he never came back from Canada. He is now a Canadian citizen. It's like, lucky you. I'm happy that you went to Canada and you stayed, because boy, I'm sure a lot of us wish. Moving on. Anyway, also, the part that in this episode that really I love Hudson Williams' delivery of it is when they're sitting outside by the fire and the loon makes that noise and it freaks Ilya out. And he's like, "What was that?" And just the delivery when Hudson Williams goes, "A loon?" and is explaining to him what the animal is. It's just a really cute kind of moment for me. I love it. And then I really like the whole discussion where basically you see both of them be jealous of the women in their respective lives. So Shane getting that text from Rose and Ilya still feeling some type of way about him having had a girlfriend. And then obviously the deeply emotional scene where he's talking about marrying Svetlana for citizenship. And Shane is like, no. And Ilya basically is explaining that even though he's bisexual and is attracted to women, the only person he cares about is Shane. And it's just interesting because it's like both of these women represent a normal life that the other person could have, and you can kind of see each of their insecurities about the fact that both of them had or do have this option to be seen one way, and it kind of scares both of them. Because it scares Ilya because he's never had a serious girlfriend, and the fact that Shane had one for a moment really, threw him. And with Svetlana, it's Shane's fear of, you, unlike me, could legitimately marry a woman and be happy because you are attracted to women. You could find one you actually want to marry and not just marry for citizenship. But again, they both had to do a reassuring of just because these women are options for, like I said, quote unquote, a normal life, the only person I want to have a life with is you. And while at the same time emphasizing that these women are their friends. These are just women that are very important in their lives, but they're not threats. And I think it's good that they both could have that moment where they basically let the other one know that about Rose and Svetlana. And then, of course, that leads into when they tell each other, "I love you" for the first time, because Shane then spends the whole night being like, now, how can I get this man to Canada, get him some citizenship, and pave the way for us finally to be together and be out? And then, of course, they confess and say, "I love you." And one of the things that I like about that is it shows how people express emotions differently and they're both valid. So, we start to see that when Ilya doesn't have his walls up, he's very expressive and emotional. And in fact, he cries. He's crying when he tells Shane that he loves him. And it's like, but Shane, that's not his personality. We see him almost on the verge of tears a lot, but like, this is not necessarily his immediate response. So, he doesn't cry when he says he loves Ilya, but he means it just as much. He's just like in shock, like, oh my gosh, he loves me. And then, like he says, "I love you too." And I just love that it's like people really, when you are not an expressive person, take that as an opportunity to minimize how deeply you feel things. And um, what's interesting to me is that, again, in an indirect way, they said "I love you" to each other before they said it to each other like directly, because Shane's way of saying "I love you" before he said it out loud, again, was to plan. "I've created this plan for us to be together." That's his expression of love before he actually says it. Um, Ilya's is to express his emotion in his native language before he says it out loud in English. And it's like, the way that they communicate their love to each other is equally valid. And just because someone isn't crying doesn't mean that they love that person any less. And Ilya just feels safe enough now to, if I want to cry because of my emotions, I can, and I'm crying because I love you that much. So it's just a very sweet scene. And then leading into like the end, when they basically, the dad finds them at the cottage, and so now they have to go talk to the parents, and Shane is going to explain that they're together and that he's gay. I really liked how in this episode, once Elliot was finally able to talk about his mother and what happened with her, it allows him to finally be comfortable in the presence of someone else's parents, seeing how much Shane is loved and being able to like relax, like, okay, these people are safe. They're not going to reject Shane. They're not going to reject me. And I can kind of ease into the same comfort I've been feeling up until this point with Shane. And I love the interactions. And one of the scenes that I really liked, that everybody really liked, was when Shane comes out to his mom. Because like I said, he has several coming out scenes. So when he's telling her about how hard he really tried, essentially, not to be gay, um, and she tells him, hey, I'm sorry I made you feel that way, that you couldn't tell me, and can you please forgive me? And he says, I forgive you and I love you. Part of it is because of, like, again, the fear of telling her that he's gay, but also I think there's that element too. He always wants to please his mother. His mother's the person that's like kind of like managing his career, and so he never wanted to disappoint her in any aspect of his life. But just how, beautiful it is to be like, no, she loves him completely, all parts of him, including his sexuality, and her acknowledging that she did kind of foster an environment where he didn't always feel safe enough to express things about himself, especially something as deep as his own sexuality. So it's really beautiful, kind of cathartic moment that they both have. And then, of course, it ending on that very sweet note of, Shane's kind of, is freaking out. He says that. And Ilya being able to calm him down again, because now that he knows that this is a safe family dynamic and he is now a part of it, he can feel open and expressive and calming Shane down in front of his parents, and he knows, I'm not going to be judged. They love you, I love you. And it's just such a sweet kind of like wrap up of all the growth they've done sharing with each other, and him being able to express how much he loves and cares for Shane in that moment, and the parents being like, "Oh, our baby has a boyfriend." So that's the end of all the episode reviews. This did end up being long, but I am not going to cut it. Y'all are gonna get this, and if you like it, you like it. But episode 6 actually is my favorite episode. I've been watching it on repeat, but I love the entire series. And like I said, as adaptations go, this one really knocked it out the park to me. But just, I have some final thoughts though, kind of like overall about this particular fandom. So, what this has reminded me of reading these books and watching this TV show, or what it's made me think of, is do not listen to people on the internet. Don't even listen to me. I'm like LeVar Burton at the end of Reading Rainbow. Don't take my word for it. Like, people on the internet will have you thinking one thing about everything. The people on the internet who are talking about the book, the TV show, like, I'm so glad I read it for myself and watched it for myself, because it's like people really were misrepresenting almost literally every aspect of the books and the TV show. And it's like, did we read the same books and watch the same show? Yeah, don't listen to people on the internet. If this is something you want to get into, then by all means do it. But don't be listening to everybody tell you their opinions on it, because a lot of people, it's like I said, what did you read and what did you watch? And to that end, yes, the books are romance novels, so part of like selling romance novels is you do have to make them, spicy and smutty and things like that. But people describing this show as if, like in musical, every scene is almost every scene is a musical number. The way people tried to act like they had sex every other scene, it's like, no. And it just let me know that people were watching this show through the internet, through clips, and not actually watching it, because every scene that they had sex in served a purpose in showing the evolution of their relationship. And also, every scene that they had sex in, like, was kind of like intimate. Like, even when it was just the beginning of them just hooking up, they still took like a lot of care for each other in those encounters. And so I'm like, yeah, it's not what we're used to seeing maybe in, like, I don't know, American TV versus Canadian, I don't know, or between, a gay or a queer couple. But it's like, whatever the case is, the scene served a purpose. It served a purpose for their relationship and the series overall. And it really wasn't gratuitous or like over the top. So the people who kept trying to portray it that way, and like I said, were you watching the same show? Because there is so much plot and story going on here, and you are really deliberately taking things out of context. And again, the books are really good. Like, if you don't like them because you don't like them, that's fine. But the way people are like going out of their way to talk about that the books were written poorly, or they didn't like the characterization in the books, and how the show is so much better, I'm like, you do know that those books are the source material, like literally almost verbatim for the show. No, you can't like one and not like the other. I'm sorry, especially because this was such a pretty faithful adaptation. And again, to that end, the people who prefer one character over another in like shipping pairs are very odd to me, because usually the things that you critique or find as a flaw in a character is exactly what the other character in that pairing either loves or like gives grace for that partner. So it's like, how can you hate Ilya or Shane when Ilya and Shane are the ones who love each other and show each other grace and forgiveness? Like, that's just weird. And again, that's why I hate this concept that's like around now of who fell first and who fell harder, because it definitely quantifies love and makes it seem like if you're not behaving the exact same way as your partner, I mean, obviously you don't want to leave your partner in the dark and make them think you don't love them at all, but the way people make it seem like one partner is more invested and always was, makes it feel like the other person can never catch up and like somehow has to earn the other one's love and affection because they didn't express it as soon or in, a demonstrative way. And I just, I don't like that. It's weird to me. And lastly, in the words of one of my grandmothers, y'all really know how to take the J out of joy and the H out of happy. Because this show was barely out, like 2 episodes before people started digging into these actors' personal lives, bashing the show without having read it, bashing the books without having read it, just giving all kinds of ridiculous takes and opinions. And it's like, y'all, this is a TV. Have fun. It's a TV show. It's a book. The way people just and this is like out of every fandom that I've ever been a part of or interested in, this is the one where I'm like, y'all need some help. Because people were so quick. Like I said, I've never seen people so quick to hype something up and tear it down at the exact same time. Like, it's only been a month, and a lot of this was happening after only 2 episodes. I'm like, oh my God. And the way that people obsessed over it. Well, this isn't for you. This is for this audience. This is for this audience. If you don't like this, then you must be this. Like, y'all are too much for me. And like, the obsession with these actors is like, these are young actors that most of us, they were complete unknowns before this show. And the way y'all are obsessing over them and their Instagram profiles and their private lives, it's like, are you okay? Are you normal? Can you watch TV normally? And it's like, I really, really hate Instagram for actors, because people really treat Instagram like it's a private diary of actors' lives, that we can ascertain anything of any significance or meaning from essentially what I call a picture book. Like, just Ooh, it's just so weird to me that that's like the metric people use now. Like, oh my God, they have so many followers. Oh my God, they didn't follow this person. Oh my God, they unfollowed this person. Oh, who's following them? Who is this? Y'all are weird. Y'all are weird. And Instagram just, oh my God, this is so weird to me. And also, like I said, I've never seen people so quick to be wet blankets and like take away the joy of something before we even had a chance to let that stuff marinate. Because the way people are already talking about the trajectories of their careers and who's going to have a bigger career, and it's like, I get your points. Especially because one of the actors is a person of color. But you are not their agent, you are not their family, and you are not their friends. So, what would be a smart thing to do? Enjoy them in this performance and then just wait and see. Like, I promise you, it's okay after a show that's only been out a couple of weeks to wait and see how this goes. Y'all are weird. And I say this as a fangirl who likes to dibble and dabble in almost every aspect of fandom. I love fan fiction. I love fan edits. I love fan art. I love behind the scenes interviews. I love all of that. Occasionally, I do get into real person fiction, but I don't share that online and I don't really take it serious. Y'all, just let these two young men enjoy the success of this show and enjoy the fictional characters of this show. Like, y'all, this whole, like I said, discourse, y'all was doing a lot. Y'all was doing too much and y'all was doing a lot. And y'all need to chill. Anyway, but in conclusion, love the series, love the books. If you're interested in either, here in America, it's streaming on HBO Max. And like I said, the paper version, I don't know if they're going to have it in print or available in 2026. But like I said, I read both of them as ebooks. And yeah, this has been my very long review of Heated Rivalry. And thanks for watching.